Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pharmaceutical Soccer. I'm so happy to be here, especially since I'm coming to you from Studio 132 here in Nashville. I'm excited to watch some soccer this week. Oh, wait. No, not excited to watch soccer this week, unfortunately. But I am excited to be here in Nashville. Back again, of course, I'm here with Clay Trainum and Valer Shavilla. We are the one and only Pharmaceutical Soccer. Clay and Valer, what's up? How are things? Life?
It is Monday, August 12th. This is one of the most important days of the year. It is 812 day. So shout out to everyone from the 812, mostly those from Evansville. It's the best day of the year to celebrate everyone and everything and all that's good and great in the world that comes from Evansville. And the fact that everything in the world is connected to Evansville. It's the center of the universe. So shout out to Evansville.
What's your least favorite 812 city or area, I guess?
Jasper. Easy.
Okay.
I was
Wow.
happy when they
I didn't
lost
know
the
if
Little
you
League
had
World
one, but
Series. I
yeah.
was
You were
happy when they
you were
lost the
wondering
Little
if
League
Clay
World
would
Series.
have an answer for that or not. There was absolutely an answer for that coming.
Yeah, I mean, I guess fair enough. We always, hey, commit to the hater bit. It is what it is.
They were
Yeah,
a big
those
rival in baseball.
Well, how are you celebrating
right.
812 Day, Clay? Are you doing anything specifically Midwestern today to celebrate?
I'm doing something explicitly not Midwestern, which is that we usually do a all veggie dinner on Mondays. So that's like the
Mm.
opposite of what someone in Evansville would do.
Absolutely.
But I live 812 day every day, as you guys know. I'm wearing an Evansville baseball t-shirt right now.
There
So
you go.
Perfect. Half of your wardrobe
noises.
specifically is Evansville baseball or volleyball or something t-shirts. So
I will go ahead and tell you guys about my weekend because Steven was in town and we got to hang out a little bit. So that was nice. And I totally destroyed Steven in Uno and Ticket to Ride. So I just want the world to know this.
I screw you. I thought we had an agreement of not bringing this up. This is completely unfair.
But no, it's been good having Steven around. We've been kind of hanging out, and then we have I don't know what we're gonna do this week, but maybe I'll see Steven again. I mean, he's literally in my basement right now, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
He is
Nothing, you
willingly in
idiots.
your
Dr.
basement.
Dre's
Just
dead. He's locked in my basement. Uh-huh.
let's just make it clear that he's willingly in your basement. Blair has not
I
kidnapped Steven.
I do feel better, so I'm not sick anymore. So that's good. That's the one update I have for this weekend. And then I start my volleyball league tonight, so that's gonna be fun, I guess. Well, I might quit on the spot, so I just need everybody. I'm trying to say it on here, so maybe like people will hold me accountable. But we'll see. That's my weekend update. I don't have anything else. I'm stopping.
That was like a weekend update. I appreciate it, especially because it mentioned me. And besides me losing in games, but other than that, it's a good time. Clay, what do you do this
Clay, you
weekend?
got anything fun?
Honestly, I just did. There's a lot going on in my world at the moment, so I just kind of relaxed for the weekend. I did play a little bit of D&D yesterday. Uh, Kicked a vampire's ass, but other than that,
There's
So
nothing better than beating up a vampire.
yeah, so Strahd is biting the dust.
Well, just like there's not a lot going on in Clay's weekend time, there's also not a lot going on when it comes to Nashville soccer. But no matter what, we are still here to fill up that time, talk about Nashville soccer as much as we possibly can. And we're going to do that by doing a mailbag, and we're going to do that here in a little bit. Only going to have just the first two segments today, nothing going on in the third. So we're going to kind of talk about everything that we would have in the third segment here at the current moment, which would be what?
The
What
women's.
I will say this. I did watch over the weekend the U.S. women's national team win a gold medal for the first time in 2012 since 2012. Now, that wouldn't be considered much of a long streak for most countries in the world, but for the U.S. and women's soccer, it's a pretty long one to have not won a gold medal. And so, pretty fun news that with kind of a new looking squad, a lot of people who haven't played over the years starting to play bigger roles. Kind of a real transition. Obviously, Emma Hayes is the manager. It's her first tournament as manager. And I just want to circle back to this part because obviously I talk about women's soccer on here a lot, typically with regard to the local amateur teams. And there was a quote from Hayes that kind of struck me after they won, which is that, you know, there was no pro women's soccer in England when she was coming up through the ranks. And so she had said post game, America means more to me than most people realize. I was a 20-year-old and had come from a stuffy society that didn't embrace the women's game or women in football. And then I went to America. They looked after me, they nurtured me, and they opened doors for me and gave me opportunities that England never gave me. So I'm just happy to repay that faith in me, which is such a great quote and such a good testament to the state of the women's game in America, even though it has its shortcomings at times and maybe hasn't picked up in ways that we would like at times. It's a good reminder that like this is the home of the sport when it comes to women's soccer, and to see them win a gold medal was really meaningful. My wife and I sat on the sat on the couch and watched it Saturday morning and had a good time.
I also sat on the couch and watched it. I was gonna go to tailgate and watch it, but I could not get up from Saturday because we went out Friday. But no, I mean it really was a terrific like victory to see. Even with, I mean, especially because expectations were extremely low for the U.S. women in this tournament when it came to the team, they weren't necessarily high because as Clay mentioned, the women's game has picked up in so many dramatic different ways, including other countries. I mean, the fact that the final itself, uh, you know, there was just so much going on and so much to see, and the fact that the U.S. were able to come up and win that match, it was incredible.
I think it was really an interesting final because you had the US on the one side, but you also had Marta playing in probably her last, tournament game with Brazil. So that was like a really interesting narrative coming into the game. But the funniest thing to me about the whole game is, look, there's only one goal scored in it, right? And because of the way VAR is and because of the way the goal looked, I would imagine the number of people that celebrated that goal when it was actually scored was pretty low because everyone was
I did
waiting to
not
see if,
celebrate it.
yeah, everyone was waiting to see if it was actually offside, which kind of tells me that's kind of an issue, I think, in the game because we didn't celebrate at the house when it happened because we were like, oh, that looks so offside, and we were just waiting for VAR to say it was offside. So it's kind of a reminder of how much that has changed the game, and maybe not in the most positive ways.
There was some other soccer that did happen as well over the weekend, somewhat related to Nashville, and that would be Huntsville. Huntsville had a match over the weekend as well. Um, I mean, look, Huntsville has got a win under the belt against a pretty good Chattanooga team.
Yeah, it's only their fifth win this season. They've been struggling. They haven't had a coach in a while. So they've had a couple interims come through, but they've officially hired Chris O'Neill as the head coach in Huntsville. He used to be the Miami under 17s coach, and he used to be with SKC before that, which probably where this connection has been made with Mike Jacobs. His era starts with a win for Huntsville, so that's pretty nice against Chattanooga. Um, Again, maybe the results are not the most important thing, but someone with his resume looks like he's been in these youth squads. He's been around MLS for a while, so it means Mike Jacobs probably saw something in him. I would assume that BJ Callahan also had conversations with him. We don't know this for a fact, but chances are they've talked to each other. And we'll see Chris's Huntsville team look more and more like the PJ Callahan Nashville SC team as we go. One important note from the Chattanooga game this weekend: Perez, who is newly acquired by Nashville SC from LA Galaxy on loan, was the one who scored the goal. So that's another positive to come out of the Huntsville side, to have a player that just joined the team be able to get some minutes. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some more Nashville SC minutes next game for Huntsville, just simply because there aren't any sort of Nashville SC games going on.
I got to say, there's something just very nice about seeing a Nashville SC developmental team beat Chattanooga.
So nice.
Something,
Honestly, it
something for the
feels
old
so
school
good.
folks there.
there was some scraps in it. Like Blair and I were actually watched some of it. There were some like scraps in the match as well, and I was getting extremely excited. It is one of my probably top 3 or top 5 hated teams ever in history.
I will say that is something that will be an actual real rivalry in MLS Next Pro, because there is a following in Huntsville, there is a following in Chattanooga. They have significant fan groups. They're among the league leaders in attendance, so it is like nice to see on that level from MLS Next Pro as well.
And for everybody following up, the next game will be Saturday, August 17th. They will be hosting New York Red Bulls 2 in Wicks Family Field, which is in Huntsville. So for those of you interested, you might get to see a little bit more of a more of a senior roster than usual there, just simply because of these Nashville SC games not happening. But we'll see what Chris O'Neill does with this team, and we'll make sure to keep you updated on here.
Yeah, we'll absolutely keep you guys updated because there's not a ton of Nashville soccer to currently talk about, but we're here to cover all of it. Is there any Nashville soccer anything before we get to the mailbag that like is of any sort of interest at all?
There will probably be some intra squad games going on this week for Nashville SC just to keep everybody healthy. I don't think any of them will be sort of anything to anything other than just like let's run around and train. But I know for a fact that Nashville SC are training this week, so this is not a case of like you have a week off or anything like that. They will be training this week. They will most likely be training next week to prepare for this upcoming game. So BJ Callahan and his staff are working. They're not taking any days off, as far as I know. So that's just an important update to have.
Sweet. Well, then let's just do it. Let's get to the mailbag. We got a lot of questions to answer from y'all, the patients, and we're excited to get to those. And I'm sure there's a lot of conversations that will come about them, and we'll do that next right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer. And we are back right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer at Pharma Soccer on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also, you do have the ability to go to our Patreon and check that out. $5 a month, you're able to help the show out. It's really appreciated. It makes us able to continue to do this. And we love to do it. We want to make sure that we do it every week, even when there is no soccer going on. So if you are a part of our Patreon as well, you did get first dibs into our mailbag for today. And there will be a lot of other random offers and stuff like that we have on there. So please make sure you check out our Patreon, also pharmasoccer.com, where we have a website. And that's always fun. So check that out as well. But let's do it. We haven't done a mailbag in a while, so I'm extremely excited to be able to answer some questions. Some definitely themes when it comes to these questions for sure, from our Patreons and Twitter and all that fun type of stuff. So we are very excited to ask these. I'll start it. Let's just get it going. So our first question here comes from Octavio.
Octavio.
What?
Octavio.
Yeah, I'm already messing up the mailbag. I'm doing great. Octavio asks specifically, is it time to talk total rebuild, sell Mukhtar, Godoy, Leal, etc., while there may be some value in truly building a team around a new coach's system? I will give Clay the ability to answer that one first.
The first thing is you're not selling Hani Mukhtar. You just signed him to an extension. So it would have to be something, and I don't think there's any reason to. He's a good player. He's shown that he can be a good player in this league. He's put up MVP level numbers on multiple occasions. That he's the guy. He is the face of the club. It's him and Walker Zimmerman are the face of the club. Leal, I think we've kind of gone down this road several times. It's untenable to keep him on his salary level at NSC. He does have another year left on his deal. Could you buy him out potentially? I think that if you're gonna let someone go, he's probably first on the list that you're letting go, because being unavailable is the biggest knock against him. He's a good enough player, but if he's not available, it doesn't matter. Godoy, I kind of am starting to go down that road as well with him. He is getting older. I do think, and I think we talked about this maybe last week, there are enough pieces around this NSC squad that you can keep some pretty big tentpole pieces and still have a good squad that you can build around and make the rest of the squad younger. So when we say total rebuild, I don't necessarily know that it's a total rebuild in the way that we'd associate with other sports, because I think you're keeping Mukhtar, you're keeping Zimmerman, you're keeping Surridge. So if you're keeping your three DPs, is it really a total rebuild?
Right. And I think
I think
go ahead, Fuller.
go ahead, Stu. That's fine.
No, you.
Okay. Well, I think what I would say, it's 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 gonna be a little bit of a rebuild just simply because you have a new coach, right? That's kind of a given at this point. There's gonna be players who are gonna move on, but I think the other thing is that when the team is this low, it's hard to get value of a lot of players, and I think the current player pool for Nashville SC is older players, mainly veterans, right? Who it's hard to get value for somebody like Hani Mukhtar right now. And when I mean value, I mean like appropriate value, right? He is the league MVP like not even 2 years ago. So like getting rid of him at this moment will not be ideal, and I don't think will solve many of Nashville's problems. The other thing I'll say is that I would be very shocked if there was this total rebuild under Mike Jacobs. The only way I can see Nashville SC going for a total rebuild is that if Mike Jacobs was to leave Nashville SC and someone else comes in and takes that GM spot. Because as long as Mike Jacobs is in here, this is his squad. He's built this squad, right? And I don't see him going like, well, never mind, take all our top players. Let's start from scratch. I don't see that happening anytime soon. And for me, I agree with that approach. I don't think that should happen. I don't, like Clay said, there are some good pieces when you look at people like Shaq Moore, maybe players like Shaq Moore, players even like Yazbak, who I know just signed. Surridge, I think there's still a lot to get out of them. Tyler Boyd before the injury, especially. I think these players are still capable of performing at a high level, and I don't think getting rid of them makes sense. The other side is, I would say getting rid of some of the players who do not seem to fit BJ Callahan's system or aren't performing up to level would be more of a priority than a rebuild necessarily. It's just who once they identify who those players are, how can you get rid of them? And then of course the players who are on high salaries that Clay already talked about.
I think it is weird just the way the FO and just again, and we've talked about this. It's weird to want to be able to have, talk about we have faith in this new coach being able to go do his thing and then wait, 2.5 months to hire him. We're in a weird limbo of, is this a rebuild or is this a team that you believe can get into a low playoff spot and then make a run into MLS itself? And I still believe that Nashville is in that limbo, definitely looking more towards the back end of, hey, let's go to a rebuild. I do think at the end of the year, I think we will see the biggest shift in Nashville, in a Nashville SC roster that we have seen in the history of this club. Do I know what that means? No, not specifically, but I do believe there'll be some interesting moves when it comes to players like Dan Lovitz, when it comes to Anibal Godoy, when it comes to some of these other players as well. Are you going to keep them around when it comes to bigger pieces that you want to believe in? Or if it is something, hey, like we need to cut our losses and move on. Two players I think about that, Sean Davis and Jack Mayer, when it's like, look, like we had a lot of faith in these players coming in, but it's not necessarily working. So I am curious to see where the changes are at the end of the season, but being in this limbo makes things extremely confusing.
And I just want to add to that, like Mike Jacobs, who is the guy who put the team together. And considering that Callahan was a Jacobs hire, and it certainly seems like Huntsville was a Jacobs hire, he feels pretty safe in his spot here. He plays a big role in deciding how the team is going to play and how they're going to build the roster to suit that. And so I think like people that assume because a new manager is coming in, there's going to be this massive change. I think that's just kind of misplaced. Managers change all the time in the sport. You have to have some sort of core system belief. Like I don't mean system playing, I just mean sort of system of putting a team together and what you want to emphasize and how you want to make these pieces fit together that work with several different types of managers. Because if you just suit it just to one guy, you're setting yourself up for failure if it doesn't work. And so I think that we'll see players that better fit the system that BJ Callahan wants to run, but the core like absolute baseline stuff has got to be part of what Callahan is putting into the way that he's going to manage too. Like these are the pieces that are available, and then you build around what's available and what you can get with the places that are interchangeable.
Next question did come from Al. Al had a few questions, but we're just going to start with the first one. Since midway through last season, I believe the defensive players in MLS have figured out how to play Hani Mukhtar. However, with the New England Revolution game, I saw him with more space that I have seen him without his back to the goal and someone in his spot. I think that's a legitimate good sign for BJ as he seems to realize it. Thoughts on that? And I do have I kind of want to just say something that uh it was a specific quote from BJ in the beginning of the season of how to kind of like what's Hani Mukhtar's role going to be. And I believe BJ said, and I might be paraphrasing here, that the goal is to make sure the burden is not just on Hani Mukhtar to produce for this team. And I think that's something that's going to be like extremely evident in the way that BJ Callahan coaches. I think during that Revs game, you saw Hani Mukhtar just straight out to the left side, almost in like a Jacob Schaffelberg position in some ways to try and get him some space. And I think that's something that BJ is going to look into.
I was talking about this specifically on the last show. In each of the last two games, even though they weren't wins, Hani had the ball at his feet going forward, sometimes at pace, which hasn't happened a lot. I would say that I don't think this is MLS figuring out Hani. Hani's been kicked and pushed and gotten his hand. Like that's been happening since the very start. We've talked about that. I think that's a big reason why he dives a lot is because he's trying to make sure that people see what's happening to him because he's gone through games where he's been fouled 5 or 6 times in a game. And so I think that everyone does that with any skill player in the league. Obviously, it's the way that you kind of deal with it because you can get away with more against those types of guys. But I will say getting him in more situations where he can be successful, which is typically ball at his feet, moving towards goal with space. That's what you're wanting to do because whenever he's got to build up slowly and has to try and make a turn in a spot where he can't do it, that's when things kind of fall apart for NSC.
And I think it's a little bit of yes, maybe defenders figured out something about Hani, but also when your only solution is pass it to Hani and hope for the best, essentially that's going to stop. That's not going to work every time. And I think that's more so what has been carrying Nashville SC was Hani Mukhtar. And going back to that, to what Steven was saying, is that once he's not producing, then who else is producing? And that's been the eternal question for Nashville SC, right? But what I would say is that Hani also will need to change the way he plays and will need to be open-minded with this new change. I'm not suggesting he's not or anything of that sort. I'm just saying this is kind of like Clay was saying about doing the best with what you got in BJ Callahan's case. It's BJ Callahan's job to improve these players he has currently. His job is not to go out and recruit new players. His job is to improve the current players. And it's these players, current players' jobs to do what BJ Callahan is asking them to do to the best of their ability. So it's a little bit of a relationship there where Hani needs to be a little bit more open-minded, which BJ has said all of the guys have been open-minded about his style of play. And maybe Hani's new role going forward is that 8 position. Maybe he's no longer a 10 like we're used to or a striker as we're used to. And that's okay. He's going to have to do what's best for the team. And if you have an 8 that is this technical, that is this good on the ball and can score goals, then your team is in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, and Valaire talked about that at length last week about the New England game too. Like maybe we see Hani as he was signed to play. Because when Hani was signed, this is the role that like as an 8 or you know not as a striker, someone who's a little bit more in midfield was what he was signed to play. And his first year, that's kind of largely how he played. And then because of the league and because of his skill set and the other players around him, he ultimately ended up playing almost a second striker more so than a midfielder. And that's where he just turned it on and put a bunch of numbers up. He never put up numbers like that in his career. Like he was a guy who made the pass that led to the assist a lot of times more than the guy that made the assist or scored the goal. Like that was something that he was known for doing. He did get like goals and assists, but that was kind of what he was pitched at whenever he was first brought in. And then it just sort of the situation necessitated kind of going back to the managers adjusting to what they have idea here, necessitated moving Hani forward. And then they moved Hani forward and then there was no looking back because he was so effective. So now it's like, well, he's not as effective in that role. So maybe we adjust, we change the system a little bit because he is still far and away the best player on the team.
Oliver asks, hey, Oliver, how's it going? Good. Hey. Anyways, any chance that Jacob Schaffelberg leaves? Belair.
And I think Al also had a similar question about Jacob Schaffelberg, about cashing in on his high price after the Copa America performance. I think we can combine those two. I don't see a way where Nashville SC can justify Jacob Schaffelberger leaving this window, which closes in 2 days, by the way. So, no, I don't think he's leaving now. In the winter is a completely different thing, especially with the Tyler Boyd injury. Again, that's another reason why I don't see him leaving now this window. I think it would be a very, very hard the rest of the season for Nashville SC if they don't have Jacob Schaffelberg. And I don't see him leaving this window. I see him possibly leaving in the winter if the right offer came in. That right offer is strongly dependent on how Jacob Schaffelberg performs in these next 9 games in MLS. If Jacob Schaffelberg carries on his Copa America performance and mainly gets goals and assists for Nashville SC, then maybe his value will continue to grow or stay the same, or however you want to phrase that. If Jacob Schaffelberg scores once in these 9 games, then there's not going to be a team out there who will pay for him. I mean, I understand he did well in Copa America. I understand he did well at Jesse Marsh's system. And maybe there's a team out there who are willing to pay for him. But at his age, you're not going to have a team pay the right price for him unless he's performing really well, which then begs the question of what is the right price? And that's completely up to Nashville SC and what they evaluate him. To me, if you're Nashville SC and you get an offer for $1 million or $2 million for Jacob Schaffelberg, that's not worth it. Why would you risk that? Why would you get rid of one of your best assets for that low of an amount? I just don't think that price tag makes sense for Jacob Schaffelberg. If the price all of a sudden goes to $5 million, then yeah, maybe Nashville SC can reinvest that money into something productive. Again, I think it all depends on what offers come in, and those offers are dependent on how Jacob Schaffelberg performs to end the season.
Yeah, so it's an interesting situation at their end. So just in the interest of full disclosure, Schaffelberg is currently on a salary of 395,000, and that's a fairly moderate wage. It's not terribly expensive. I would imagine that he's probably going to get some looks in the winter, like Valer was talking about. I do also think that there's another couple of people that would be involved in any potential transfer for Schaffelberg that have to be thought about, which is how much of the transfer fee would Nashville actually get, considering that Nashville bought Schaffelberg. Then the other side of it is MLS kind of has the final say on this, because the player would be transferred from MLS to another league because of the structure. I don't think that they would particularly get in the way for a low dollar transfer, so I'm not particularly worried about that. But I do think that that is worthy of keeping in mind. And the other side of this is, let's say that there's $1 million or a $2 million offer that does come in for Schaffelberg, and Nashville says no. Well, then Nashville's going to have to probably turn around and pay Schaffelberg more money, and that is where things will get dicey, because like if you're not willing to pay him more money, then he can make that very difficult to move forward. And so we to take it back to another Canadian international that was in Nashville, Alistair Johnston was on a fairly low wage in MLS. He was an MLS draft pick. Nashville was probably unlikely to pay him I don't think he was making $500,000, but it was somewhere around there for Montreal. So they moved him to Montreal. Montreal paid him that for 1 year, and then he moved on. Like, I can imagine a scenario like that playing out too, dependent on, the type of offers that come in. So I do think that if you get probably anything more than 2 million for Nashville, you got to think about it, because I think that there's a lot of what ifs that are still there with Schaffelberg that could or could not come out. But ultimately, he's a very, very key part of the roster, and Nashville's a better team if he's on it.
Yeah, I think at the end of the season, Nashville will either have to pay him more or sell him. I don't think they can afford to not do either. And I'll just say he has a contract through 2026 and an option year for 2027. So technically, he is in Nashville's books until then, and they can even pick him up through 2027.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's going to happen. We have seen Nashville do some extremely weird stuff just because they like to keep things under wraps pretty heavily. I do think if Schaffelberg, again, I don't think it's going to happen, but if Schaffelberg were to be gone in this specific window before the 15th in the next couple of days, that does kind of put us in the limbo question of if we're going to be rebuilding or going for that. Definitely a rebuild would be happening in any way, shape, or form if Schaffelberg were to leave. We have a Tyler Boyd injury. We would have to be using any sort of Huntsville player to just fill in that specific space. It would be a full total rebuild for sure. But I don't think, again, as Blair said, I don't think Nashville can afford to have Jacob Schaffelberg not on the team while Tyler Boyd is being injured. This gives Schaffelberg the ability to drive up his own value, like Valaire said, in this time. And it's going to be on him to be able to do that. And honestly, I think he does do that over this time. I do think he does drive up his value just because he is a very good player. In the winter, I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens with him as well. Chris mentioned a question that we've talked about a lot, and I think it's going to be very interesting now. Chris asks, when's Randall coming back? Does he have a place on this team?
When is he coming back? He is back. He's a full participant of training. He's not healthy enough. He's not fit enough, I should say, not healthy enough, sorry. He's not fit enough to start or play games, and that's why he wasn't included in the 2 Leagues Cup games. However, he is a full participant in training. That to me says there's a player who's played all of 16 minutes in about 2 years of soccer. So that's probably why he's not playing yet. I think he's going to benefit from these maybe intra-squad games. Maybe we'll see him in Huntsville. We've seen him in Huntsville before. Maybe just to get some minutes under his belt to maybe then be able to play for the team. I think at this point, Randall Leal's only place in this team is to somehow impress BJ Callahan and convince him that he's worth keeping. I think that's the only thing Randall Leal can do at the moment is to convince BJ Callahan, because I think it's settled. I think for Randall Leal is settled with Nashville SC, and the only positive thing for his time in Nashville SC that's left is BJ Callahan. If he can convince BJ Callahan that he is a player who can play, who can be good, who can be a positive for this team, maybe then he can stay with Nashville SC. But I think at this moment, if I was Nashville SC, if I was Mike Jacobs, I'll be trying my hardest to get out of that contract as fast as I can.
So this is sort of related to another question. Jay out there asked if NSC would use their contract buyout on Davis or Leal. I kind of think it has to be Leal. And so I do wonder if there's a chance, because we've talked about this before on this show, if there's a chance that because Leal has kind of dealt with the injuries, because he is kind of a part of the local community, like Valaire has seen him at elementary school soccer games, like he's out and about and he loves the city and his whole family's here. If there's a chance of basically renegotiating that contract, maybe buying him out and bringing him back on a lower wage, I do think that Nashville would be receptive to a gamble like that with Randall. I think that he's a good enough player that maybe you renegotiate for 1 year. If he's healthy for a whole year, you come back to the table, because either he's improved his stock, it's a pretty good gamble on his part, or, it doesn't work out and he still gets to play. I think you have to buy him out as it stands right now. And so his main job will be staying healthy and looking like he's an irreplaceable player. And unfortunately, on his side, I don't think he's looked like an irreplaceable player for the better part of 2 years. I think it's been a while since we've seen that Randall. That was a lock to be in the Costa Rican team. We haven't seen that Randall in a while.
I think it's going to take a lot for him to prove that, and I'm not doubting him. I think he works hard. He has that passion. He clearly cares about this team and this sport. That said, sometimes physically you just can't keep going, and it's the sad reality of sports. It's the sad reality of athletics. You can you see it in all sports, you see it at all times, where someone clearly has the talent, knows exactly what to do, but their body just can't do it. Now we'll see. I think these 9 games also another important player. We talked about how important these are for Schaffelberg and his value. These 9 games could earn Leal either a longer stay with Nashville SC or even maybe a loan move somewhere else or to be sold somewhere else. With his current salary, being sold somewhere else just seems a little hard unless he takes a huge pay cut. To where a loan move where Nashville pays a little bit of his salary, maybe, and the other team pays a little bit of his salary, maybe that's more something they can do. And I do want to note that his contract goes through 2025 and has an option for 2026. So next season is he will be still under contract fully with Nashville SC. So they are on the hook for him unless they buy him out or they find a way to get him out of the club.
Yeah, I personally believe there's over a 75% chance that his contract in some way, shape, or form gets bought out at the end of the season. And I think I think just Nashville needs to do it. And I think the thing is that none of us think Randall Leal is a bad player. None of us are mad at like necessarily Randall Leal for the stuff that he's gone through. And I really do wish him the best success in the rest of his career, whether it is with Nashville or not. But I do feel like for this team specifically, it's something that's definitely starting to affect the roster, like the way the roster is built out for sure. And I think it's evident that we're starting to see that. And so that's why I think it needs to happen and is probably going to happen in some way, shape, or form.
I mean, it's easy to see how it affects the roster build right now because can you say right now if he was healthy, where would he play?
Nope. I don't know where he'd play. Nope.
Like he's clearly been planned to not be available for chunks of the year with the way that they've built the roster out because we don't know where to put him on the field. I think that is a pretty big sign that they're planning for a future without him.
And Sean Davis is on a similar deal, by the way. He is signed because I know the question mentioned him. He's signed through 2025 with an option year for 2026 at a very similar salary, which is over $1 million. So that makes them both down players. And the only difference here is that Sean Davis is actually available. So at least there's that. The best ability is availability, and Leal has not been able to give that to Nashville SC. So then Sean Davis, while he's maybe not performing to as high level as Nashville SC expected, at least he's there available every game.
Yeah, I do think Sean Davis does have a little bit more of a value addition too, just because of his history with the Red Bulls. He wasn't always terrible here at Nashville. He has had a bad season or two, obviously not even making the starting, 11 most matches for, in that central midfield. But I do think there was some value still with Sean Davis around the league. It just depends on what that is. Got one more question that is kind of MLS related, Nashville related, but not really. But I do think it's good to answer it and fun for us. Thomas asks, there was a rumor of MLS starting a women's league independently of both USL and NWSL. Do you have any other sources, and can you compare the management styles of these three entities? If you guys can start answering that question, I'm going to Google this to see if it's possible that I do break this before anybody else. So please hold.
Well, it first off, that rumor is kind of based on one blog post. I don't totally buy that. It's important to remember your sources here. But that being said, this doesn't come totally out of the blue. Now, USL is starting a USL women's league, or they have a USL women's professional league. That women's professional league and USL will be at the same level as far as the United States Soccer Federation is concerned. It'll be at the same level as NWSL. Significantly less money, significantly less of a following as it stands now, but it will be a direct competitor to NWSL. Now, that out of the way, there are reports that have happened in the last several months that MLS has talked to NWSL and has talked to WPSL about starting a women's MLS affiliated league. Both sides came out to quash that story whenever it was popping up. It never really got to a big headline, but enough reporters were talking about it that they kind of on background, they kind of got washed away a few weeks ago. Now, this rumor is that MLS will be starting a league that's separate from both of the leagues. I would buy that happening maybe a little bit more because we've seen that happen. That is basically essentially what MLS Next Pro is they pulled half of the USL teams in to separate the MLS Reserve League. Uh, NWSL would immediately lose probably a number of their teams if MLS were to start a women's league because a number of NWSL teams are affiliated with MLS organizations. They have the same owners, the same front office. And I would have to imagine that in a situation where MLS were to start its own league, the sort of star of the league in terms of attendance, in terms of, international relevance, being Portland Thorns would kind of be the first thing that we would see from a WMLS sort of thing. I think that there's a lot of bridges that need to be crossed there, and I think that there's a lot of things that have to happen if this were to happen. But I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand because this is something that MLS has done before, and I would really have to worry about the longstanding health of NWSL because then you see, well, USL has its women's league. One of the star organizations in USL is Louisville, and Louisville has a team in the NWSL.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily see MLS not doing this as well. Like, I definitely see MLS in a way, ooh, let's see this growing, this growing side of the sport. Let's kind of take advantage of it. Doesn't necessarily mean that MLS is in any, like, honestly, MLS sucks if they do this. This definitely shows that they care about growing their own brand instead of growing soccer, specifically in the United States itself, which is always said is the plan of MLS. I mean, NWSL is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, women's league in the world when it comes to the way that women's soccer is played. So if MLS is just trying to take advantage of that, that's just extremely unfortunate.
It's certainly the most competitive women's league in the world. It's also the longest lasting women's professional league that's existed in the US because these things WPS was around, WUSA was around. Like this is something that has found a way to become a more than just a fledgling league because most of these women's leagues that have started up before NWSL felt fledgling and you saw them kind of go away within 5 to 6 years. I do think that it would make more sense if MLS were just buying in WSL because they would be buying into a league that already exists. That makes more sense to me as a rumor than the other things that are out there. But honestly, I just don't see MLS spending money like this right now. I think that they could do it. I think that it wouldn't be out of character for them to do it, but it does seem like a pretty costly enterprise for an organization
They'll
that
just have
is doing all right.
another expansion team, just $250 million for another expansion team. There you go. They have their seed money.
But I was just saying, like, it's a pretty costly enterprise that's being put out there, and it's a costly enterprise that doesn't result in a huge amount of money being added to your league's bottom line. So I don't think it's out of the question. I think they could do it. I just don't think it's as close as to being happening as like some of the stories that were out there. I think it's something that could happen down the line, though.
And with that, that was the mailbag. That was a lot of fun,
No,
y'all.
we have one more.
Nope.
We have one more.
Steven can't see the second page. There's one more question.
Oh my God. Is there a second page?
Yeah, and the guy who's asked the question is Steve. I mean, just how much could you like miss the
Fair
mark?
enough. Okay, Steve, specifically as of right now, which players on the current roster do you think are likely to be back next season? Do you think those would be easier to answer players that are likely not to be back next season?
Yeah, and I think that kind of answers, if we do it that way, it answers Al's third question, which he asked about which players are on the chopping block, which we're not going to use that terminology necessarily. But, in terms of what players I'm expecting to come back, I think most, obviously the three DPs, I think those three are untouchable for Nashville SC. I think all three of them will be back, will serve the rest of their contract. When it comes to players maybe leaving, I would not be surprised if BJ Callahan and Mike Jacobs move on from the likes of maybe Teal Bunbury and Alex Muyl. I think especially in Alex Muyl's case, he has value in this league, and Nashville SC can get value out of him. Now, at the same time, he's a Red Bulls guy. BJ Callahan's system is similar to the Red Bulls. So is it better for Nashville SC to keep him? And I think the biggest questions remain those two players we talked about, or more so than the few players we talked about, Sean Davis, Randall Leal, Annabelle Godoy. There's not a. Let's look at it from the midfield perspective, where you have Sean Davis, Drew Yearwood, Annabelle Godoy, Patrick Yazbek, and Tabar Anunga. And I think out of those, we're definitely going to see some departures. In terms of Drew Yearwood, his contract's up at the end of the year, and there's nothing guaranteeing Nashville. They don't have an option. It would have to be a brand new contract that they will negotiate with Drew Yearwood. So I think that's a curious case for me to look for. Did Drew Yearwood do enough this season for Nashville to bring him back? If they do bring him back, he will not be on a U22 initiative contract, which is what he is on currently. So that's one to look for. If Drew Yearwood is not coming back, then I don't think Nashville can afford to get rid of many of its other central midfielders. Maybe Anunga doesn't come back because you have Asadic as well. I forgot to mention. So there's 6 of them, right? So if Anunga is sold or traded, then maybe it makes sense to bring Yearwood back. But I think all of those are related to who all is there. So Sean Davis, if you're saying Sean Davis, Drew Yearwood, and Annabelle Godoy are all leaving, then that puts Nashville in a very, very interesting position where 3 central midfielders are leaving. And I just don't think that's realistic. So I think at most we'll see 2 leave, maybe 1 addition. And most likely scenario is just one of the central midfielders leaves this upcoming season. That's at least how I'm looking at it from now, just looking at the roster. You can't lose that many players in one position.
And I'm looking at the forward line a little bit. I think it's kind of an interesting one to think about. Sam Surridge is obviously staying. I think Ajago has played himself into being a pretty consistent player, not just the next 9 games, but all of next season. Then you've got Wubens Pasius, who I was hoping to see during Leagues Cup a little bit, but I know that they're high on him down in Huntsville. And so that leaves you with Bunbury. I wouldn't be surprised if Bunbury's back, honestly, with those being the other options at center forward. I think that you can get some cheaper ones, which is the reason why he might move on, but I wouldn't be surprised there. Center back, it seems pretty clear to me that unless something changes majorly in the next few games, we're going to see Jack Mayer maybe on his way out. Mayer's on at $700,000. I mean, he's almost $800,000 this year for his contract. That's a huge contract for a center back. Honestly, that should be a guy who's definitely well above replacement level at center back in MLS, and I'm not sure that he's there right now. He has been at times in the past, so I think he'll get every opportunity to play out of that. But if you've got Lucas McNaughton coming back and he's shown he can do the job for $700,000 less, I do think that that's a place where you can chop some money. It will be interesting, though, just generally speaking. Daniel Lovitz is on a little under 600 grand. Randall Leal is on more than $1 million. Sean Davis is on more than $1 million. Alex Muehl is on more than $500,000. You got Mayer on almost 800. So that if you do chop 3 or 4 of these, you've got a couple million to play with. And a couple million can turn over an entire roster pretty quickly, especially when the replacements that you're already kind of leading at this point in time, like an Ajago, is pretty cheap and pretty affordable.
And I will say there are these players who their contracts will run out after the end of the season. Brian Anunga and Annabelle Godoy, both of their contracts will be out by the end of the season. Both of them do have the NSC does have an option for 2025, so they can trigger that. If I'm Nashville SC, I'm probably negotiating with Annabelle Godoy to maybe not bring him back on that option, but bring him back on a different deal that's a little cheaper, because I would like to keep Annabelle Godoy. I think if not, I'm Nashville SC, I think he's a vital player.
And they did that with Dax 2 years ago.
They did do that with Dax, and they've done it in the past. Other players whose contracts are going to run out this season, Drew Yearwood, we already talked about him. Forster Ajago, technically his contract runs out this season. They do have an option for 3 years to add to that. So I don't see that not being picked up. Josh Bauer's contract ends this season with no options. If what Clay was saying about Jack Mayer possibly leaving, I would see him being re-signed. Julian Gaines, Brett Coleman, Ben Martino, Amar Sadic, Joey Skinner, all have contracts ending this season. All but Brett Coleman have options. So Nashville SC has a lot of flexibility with those, and their salary isn't high enough to where they need to make any drastic decisions with them. But I just want to give people an idea that there will be some players who will be poached by other teams. There'll be some players who want to leave Nashville SC as well. I don't think decisions completely in Nashville SC's hand.
And it is important to remember that these decisions are two-pronged. So if they're holding on to an older guy, they might not be holding on to an older guy just because they want to or because they don't believe in turning it over, but because he doesn't cost a whole lot to keep. So
Right.
Bunbury is less than 300. You're not going to find a lot of people that are, of a high level in MLS for under that. So like he might be worth keeping just because he doesn't cost a whole lot of money, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Nashville's sticking with necessarily older guys. It just means that it makes more sense and to keep someone maybe who's a little older but costs less than what the alternative would be or what a similar player would be in the market.
And with that, that's the mailbag, ladies and gentlemen. I loved it. That was a really good time. I like answering questions. Very nice.
Yeah. We'll have to do another one before the end of the season, probably.
I mean, I'm sure we'll have some space to be able to do it. But we don't have a necessarily Nashville soccer game to specifically talk about. Normally, we do give a prediction at the end of this segment. So I am going to ask you guys the question with your plugs as well. Does Jacob Schaffelberg leave in the winter? Yes or no? Clay, you can start off.
Well, first off, you can check me out at NashvilleSoccerArchive.com. Follow me at Clay Lassol on Instagram and Twitter. And got some stuff going on in my life. So if you feel like donating to a couple of GoFundMe's, like that would be wonderful. One of them will be a pinned tweet on my profile a little bit later today. Another one is Wes Bowling's GoFundMe, as his family is going through a similar but not the same issue that my family's been going through. So please check out those. So go to Wes's Twitter and you can go to mine. I'll pin the tweet. Be very helpful. And as for whether or not, a much less important thing, as for whether or not Jacob Schaffelberg will be coming back after the winter, I don't think he will. I think he's gone before the season starts next year.
And for me, follow me at Valer Shabilla on social media. I talked about myself a good bit, so do that. But most importantly, Kicking a 615. We are a local nonprofit who helps kids who can afford play soccer, organize soccer free of charge, and we need your help mainly in the volunteering aspect. So please check us out and volunteer with us. We need coaches. No prior experience is needed. We'll teach you, or you'll teach yourself. But we'll make sure you have some kids to coach, and we'll walk you through everything. So please check us out and help us out as much as possible. I think Jacob Schaffelberg will stay with Nashville SC under a new deal that will see him get a higher salary. He will probably double or triple his salary, and stay with Nashville SC through next season.
At PH Steven HD, I'm just going to echo what both Clay and Valera said. Please check out, Clay's GoFundMe. There's a lot of stuff going on, and Kicking at 615 needs coaches. It's a great organization. Make sure you do that and check it out. My original thought for doing a prediction was predicting who was going to win the League's Cup in the knockout rounds.
We already did that. We did
I know.
Last
well, and I didn't even know who's in the League's Cup, so I couldn't necessarily do that. But I think Jacob Schaffelberg is going to leave in the winter. So I'm very sad about saying that because I love Jacob Schaffelberg, but I do think he will. So again, thank you guys so much for listening to the show. Appreciate it. We'll be back next week to talk about, I'm not sure, but we'll be back next week to talk about Nashville soccer.
We might be back next week. Hold on. We'll see. We might be back next week. Let's not make promises. There's no need to do that.
Very good call. All right. Well, anywho, thank you so much for listening to the show. We really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you either next week or in 2 weeks. It'll be one of the two. But if we're here next week, you get a bonus episode. So yay. We'll talk to you and have a great rest of your day.